Hey, have you ever heard of the paradox of empathy? Let's have a thought experiment about it. Empathy is often seen as the ultimate human connection, the ability to truly understand and share the feelings of another person. But what if, in trying to understand someone else's experience, we're always bound by the limits of our own? Is it possible to truly step into another person's shoes? Or are we forever confined to our own perspective? Today, we're diving into the paradox of empathy, exploring the ways it connects us, the boundaries that shape it, and the profound philosophical questions it raises about what it means to understand one another. Empathy, feeling and understanding the emotions of others, is often seen as an essential human trait. But here's the question. Is empathy something universally shared across all humans, or is it shaped by the cultures and societies we live in? Today, we're diving into this fascinating debate, exploring whether empathy is a natural instinct or a learned behavior influenced by the norms and values of different cultures. On one hand, some argue that empathy is an innate part of human nature. It's part of what makes us human. Our ability to feel connected to others, to understand their joy, pain, or fear. It's an evolutionary tool, helping us cooperate, build relationships, and thrive as social beings. Think about a mother comforting her crying child. This is often cited as an example of empathy in action. It's an instinctual response that seems universal, one that transcends cultural boundaries. But what if empathy isn't just a biological instinct? What if it's shaped by the cultures we grow up in, by the social norms, values, and expectations of the communities we're part of? Could what we understand as empathy be something that varies from one culture to another? Across the globe, cultures have different ways of expressing emotions and relating to others. In some societies, emotional expression is encouraged, while in others, restraint and stoicism are valued. So could this affect how empathy is both experienced and expressed? Take, for example, collectivist cultures versus individualist ones. In collectivist societies, like many in Asia or Africa, empathy might be expressed more through actions that benefit the group, showing support for the community, rather than focusing solely on individual feelings. In contrast, individualist cultures like those in parts of Europe and North America may focus more on individual emotional expression and personal understanding. Empathy is often praised as the key to human connection, the ability to truly understand and share someone else's feelings. But here's the catch. Can we ever really get inside someone else's experience? Can we truly understand what they're feeling, thinking, or going through? Or are we always trapped within our own perspective, forever limited in our ability to deeply connect with others? Some philosophers argue that no matter how much we try, our empathy is always incomplete. We may try to walk in someone else's shoes, but we're always wearing our own. Our personal experiences, our own emotions, and our mental frameworks shape how we interpret the world and others. It's like this. We can understand the idea of someone's pain or joy, but we can never fully live their experience. Our empathy can get us close, but there's always a gap between their reality and ours. One way people try to bridge that gap is through imaginative acts, like reading a novel, watching a film, or even experiencing art. Literature, for example, lets us slip into the minds of characters, see the world from their perspective, and experience their emotions in a very vivid way. When we read about someone going through a tough time, we might feel their pain. Like when you read about a character losing a loved one, it can feel real, and for a moment we share in their suffering. But here's the rub. Can we ever experience that suffering in the same way the character does? Can we truly know the depths of someone else's pain, or is it just an approximation? It's not just through fiction that we try to understand others. Many people try to empathize by sharing real-world experiences with those who are suffering, whether that's by supporting a friend in grief or witnessing a traumatic event. But even then, there's a limit. In moments of shared suffering, like the loss of a loved one or experiencing a collective tragedy, we might connect in deeply emotional ways. But can we ever truly become the other person? Can we ever fully inhabit their emotions, their thoughts, their reality? Even in these moments, there's a line between our experience and theirs. Their pain is uniquely theirs, and we can only try to understand it, no matter how much we care for them. Philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas suggest that while we can never fully know the experience of another, the very act of trying to understand them, of attempting to see the world through their eyes, can help us connect on a deeper, more meaningful level. Through empathy, we open ourselves up to the vulnerability of others, and in doing so, we create a bond, one that, while imperfect, is still powerful. Empathy and sympathy. We often use these terms interchangeably, but there's an important distinction between the two, and it's one that has big implications for how we connect with others. While both involve understanding and caring about others' emotions, they're quite different in how they're felt and expressed. So, which is more helpful, empathy, where you feel with someone, or sympathy, where you feel for them? Let's dive into this debate. Imagine comforting a friend who's grieving the loss of a loved one. If you feel their pain deeply, almost as if it were your own, that's empathy at work. You're not just recognizing their grief, you're feeling it. Sympathy, on the other hand, is more about feeling for someone. You acknowledge their pain, but from a more detached, external perspective. You might say, "I'm so sorry for your loss," but you don't necessarily feel their grief in the same way. It's a supportive reaction, but it doesn't involve sharing the same emotional burden. So why does this distinction matter? Both empathy and sympathy are powerful ways to show support, but they can have very different effects on both the person experiencing the emotion and the person offering support. Empathy can create deep emotional connections, but it's not without its challenges. When you empathize with someone, especially in situations like trauma, grief, or stress, you risk absorbing their emotions. This is sometimes called emotional contagion, where the emotions of others transfer to you. While this emotional sharing can be healing, it can also lead to burnout, especially for those who regularly support people in distress. Counselors, doctors, or close friends of someone going through trauma might find themselves emotionally drained or overwhelmed by the intensity of others' emotions. This is where the line between empathy and burnout can become dangerously thin. This is where sympathy might offer a more sustainable approach. When you feel for someone, you're acknowledging their pain, but you're not necessarily internalizing it. You can still offer support without being as emotionally overwhelmed. In professions like counseling or medicine, sympathy can allow someone to help others while maintaining emotional boundaries. It's still compassionate, but it's a bit more detached, allowing the helper to stay emotionally grounded and offer practical, supportive solutions. So, is one approach better than the other? Well, it depends on the situation. Empathy might be more personal and emotionally resonant. It can help people feel truly seen and understood. But in situations where someone is in crisis or trauma, too much empathy might lead to emotional exhaustion or even secondary trauma. On the other hand, sympathy can be just as supportive, but it may allow for more practical help. It's the kind of response that can maintain emotional boundaries and still allow someone to step in and assist without getting overwhelmed. Think about a friend who's going through a difficult breakup. If you're emotionally flooded with empathy, you might get lost in their pain and find it hard to help them move forward. But if you offer sympathy, you can acknowledge their sadness and offer practical advice, like distractions or encouraging them to seek support without losing yourself in their emotional state. The bottom line is that empathy and sympathy serve different purposes. Empathy can foster deep emotional connections and understanding, but it can also be emotionally taxing. Sympathy can offer practical, detached support that might be more sustainable in some situations. Both are valuable, but the key is knowing when to use each approach and recognizing when one might be more helpful than the other. Empathy is often seen as the gateway to moral understanding. The ability to feel another person's pain or joy can push us to act in ways that help alleviate suffering. But here's the catch. Is empathy always the best guide for our moral decisions? Or can it sometimes cloud our judgment? Should we rely on our emotional connection with others? Or is it more important to make ethical decisions that are impartial and based on reason? Today, we're diving into this debate, exploring how empathy can shape our sense of justice, and whether it's always the best compass for moral action. Some philosophers, like Martha Nussbaum, argue that empathy is a crucial foundation for moral understanding. When we can truly understand someone else's suffering, when we can feel their pain, we're more likely to act in ways that alleviate it. Empathy drives us to help, to be compassionate, and to seek justice. Nussbaum suggests that this emotional connection to others is what makes us care about issues of justice. When we empathize with someone's pain, we're moved to right the wrongs they experience. Take, for example, a person who has been wronged by society, whether it's due to poverty, inequality, or discrimination. If we can feel their struggles, we might be more motivated to advocate for change, push for social justice, or offer support. Empathy humanizes those who suffer. It reminds us that their pain is real, their experience is valid, and that we are morally responsible to alleviate that suffering. In this way, empathy can act as a moral guide, helping us take action when we see injustice. But not everyone agrees that empathy is the best moral compass. Philosophers like Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill have raised concerns about the role of empathy in moral decision-making. Smith, for instance, warned that empathy could lead to biased moral judgments. When we empathize too deeply with one individual or group, we may be swayed by our emotions rather than by a fair and impartial assessment of the situation. Empathy is often celebrated as a bridge between people, helping us understand and connect with one another across divides. But what if empathy doesn't always work the way we think it does? What if it's selective, only reaching some people and not others? Today, we're diving into the concept of the empathy gap, where our ability to empathize is shaped by social and political biases. Does this mean empathy is inherently biased? And if so, how can we expand our capacity to connect with others, especially those who seem so different from us? The empathy gap refers to the phenomenon where people tend to feel more empathy for those who are similar to them, whether in terms of race, class, or shared experience. In other words, we're more likely to empathize with people who look like us, talk like us, or share similar life experiences. This isn't a coincidence. It's something deeply rooted in our psychology and social conditioning. For example, think about how we react to a news story about a person in distress. If that person shares similar characteristics to us, like ethnicity or social background, we may feel a stronger emotional pull to their suffering. But if that person belongs to a group we don't identify with, the emotional response may be weaker. We may still feel sympathy or concern, but it's often not as intense, and we may not feel as motivated to act. This isn't just about personal feelings. It has real social and political consequences. Studies show that people are more likely to support policies that help groups they feel a personal connection to, while being less likely to show concern for those they perceive as different. This gap can reinforce existing societal divides, making it harder to bridge the gap between different racial, economic, or cultural groups. So what does this mean for empathy? Is it possible for empathy to be truly objective, unbiased, and universal? Or is it always shaped by our own experiences and social identities? The reality is, empathy is not a neutral force. It's deeply influenced by the way we've been socialized, the media we consume, and the communities we belong to. And this can lead to a situation where empathy works selectively, reinforcing existing inequalities. For example, think about how empathy plays out in social justice movements. We often see people rallying for causes they feel personally connected to, whether it's racial justice, gender equality, or workers' rights. While this is a powerful force for change, it also highlights how empathy can sometimes be limited to the groups we identify with most strongly. When empathy is focused on one group, it can inadvertently leave others behind. This leads us to an important question. How can we expand our capacity for empathy? How do we bridge the empathy gap and connect with people who may be vastly different from us? One approach is to consciously recognize our biases and push ourselves to connect with people outside of our usual circles. It's about challenging our natural tendencies and expanding our circles of empathy. One way to do this is through exposure, by engaging with different communities, reading about diverse experiences, and stepping out of our comfort zones. The more we understand the struggles and experiences of others, the more likely we are to empathize with them. This can be through direct interaction, talking with someone from a different background, or through mediums like literature, documentaries, or art, which can offer us insights into lives different from our own. Empathy is a powerful tool for connection, but what happens when it becomes too much? We often hear about the importance of empathizing with others, especially those who are suffering. But what if that emotional connection is too intense? What if it leads to burnout or emotional exhaustion? Today, we're exploring a concept known as empathic overload. The idea that empathy, in its rawest form, may not be sustainable in the long run. Can we really give so much of ourselves without burning out? And should we seek more detached forms of care, like compassion or justice, to protect our emotional well-being? Empathy is often seen as the key to building meaningful relationships, understanding, and compassion. It's the act of sharing someone else's feelings and experiencing their emotions as if they were your own. When we empathize with someone who is suffering, we connect on a deep, emotional level. But this deep connection can come at a cost. The concept of empathic overload refers to the emotional toll that can come from feeling others' pain too intensely, especially over extended periods. It's the exhaustion that sets in after repeatedly taking on the pain of others, whether it's supporting a grieving friend, helping someone in crisis, or working in a helping profession like healthcare, social work, or counseling. While empathy can drive us to act and support, it can also leave us emotionally drained. Studies have shown that people who consistently engage in deep empathic connections, particularly those working with trauma, suffering, or crisis, are at risk of emotional exhaustion. Over time, the intensity of this empathy can lead to burnout, compassion fatigue, or even vicarious trauma, where we begin to experience the emotional effects of others' pain as if it were our own. So what's the solution? Should we stop empathizing so deeply to protect our own emotional health? Or is there a way to engage with others' suffering without completely draining ourselves? One approach that's often suggested is to cultivate more detached forms of care, like compassion or justice, which can allow us to help others without being overwhelmed by their emotions. Compassion is similar to empathy, but involves a bit more distance. Instead of feeling another person's pain as if it were your own, compassion is about recognizing their suffering and wanting to alleviate it, but without the emotional overload. Compassion allows us to remain emotionally grounded while still being supportive and caring. Empathy is often seen as a key trait for great leadership, but how does it actually impact decision-making and governance? Today, we're exploring the role empathy plays in leadership. Empathetic leaders are known to connect with their teams, understand the challenges people face, and make decisions that prioritize the well-being of others. This emotional insight can lead to better collaboration, trust, and morale within organizations. But here's the catch. Is too much empathy always a good thing? Some argue that excessive empathy can cloud judgment and lead to biased decisions. In leadership roles, it's important to balance empathy with impartiality, to avoid favoring certain groups or making decisions based on emotions rather than facts. In social justice movements, empathy fuels action and the drive to address systemic issues. But leaders must also navigate complex problems with strategic thinking and fairness. In corporate environments, empathetic leadership can lead to more inclusive and productive workplaces, but can also create challenges in high-pressure decision-making. So, can empathy make a better leader? Or does it risk clouding tough decisions? It's all about balance. A leader who can empathize, but also maintain objectivity, is likely to foster both understanding and effective change. At the end of the day, empathy is about connection. Whether it's through technology or in person, the real challenge is finding ways to use the tools at our disposal to deepen our understanding of each other, without losing the essence of what it means to truly be there for someone. So, whatever the medium, let's keep striving to connect in meaningful ways. Thanks for watching, and remember, empathy starts with you. This ends our video today. Let us know your thought on this topic in comments, and like and subscribe to the channel.